Sharks strike without warning. When they do, survival is never guaranteed. In 2024 alone, there were 47 confirmed unprovoked shark bites worldwide, with swimmers and snorkelers facing the highest risk. The U.S. led in attacks, accounting for 60% of global incidents, while Florida remained the most dangerous hotspot. While fatal encounters are rare, each attack is a brutal reminder of the ocean's most feared predator. These 6 terrifying shark attack stories will leave you questioning how safe the water is. The ocean off the coast of California has always been a place of training, danger, and unpredictability for the U.S. Navy. The waters are deep and cold, filled with unseen threats from nature and enemy forces. On February 15, 2025, a covert military operation was underway, one that involved a team of Navy SEALs conducting an underwater training exercise. It was supposed to be routine, but the ocean had other plans. Petty Officer James "Jim" Clarkson was 32 years old, a seasoned Navy SEAL with years of experience in high-risk operations. He had trained for missions worldwide, from icy waters in the Arctic to the scorching heat of the Middle East. He was strong, skilled, and fearless, a soldier who never hesitated when faced with danger. Alongside him on this mission were 5 other SEALs: Lieutenant Cole Renshaw, Chief Petty Officer Mark Mac Fuller, Petty Officer Nathan Briggs, Petty Officer Caleb Owens, and Ensign David Knox. They had worked together for years, trusting each other with their lives. The objective of the training exercise was simple. The participants practiced an underwater approach to a submerged target site, simulating a mission in which they needed to infiltrate enemy waters without detection. The area they had chosen for training was about 10 miles off the coast, a spot the Navy often used for drills. The waters there were known for their strong currents and the occasional presence of sharks, but encounters were rare. Great white sharks had long been a part of the California coastline. These waters were their hunting grounds, home to an abundance of seals, their primary prey. While attacks on humans were uncommon, they had happened before, usually due to mistaken identity. Most sharks ignored divers and swimmers, but occasionally, one would become aggressive out of curiosity, hunger, or territorial instinct. The SEALs had begun their descent into the water just after sundown. The surface was calm, the waves barely rocking the boat as they moved. They slipped into the dark sea one by one, their bodies disappearing beneath the surface. The plan was to move toward the target site, practice an approach, and extract within 20 minutes. Jim was the last to descend, breathing steadily as he adjusted his underwater position. The team swam in formation, their lights cutting through the darkness. The ocean around them was quiet, and only their movement broke the silence. They were about 20 feet from the ocean floor, moving carefully and keeping their eyes on the mission. None of them saw the shadow lurking below. The great white shark, estimated to be at least 20 feet long, had been drawn to the area by the vibrations in the water. It had been watching them, moving closer, its powerful body gliding through the deep undetected. It had not mistaken them for prey. It was hunting. Jim had just turned a signal to Mac when it struck. The impact was immediate, a sudden force that ripped him backward. The shark clamped down on his torso, its jaws crushing through muscle and bone. Blood exploded into the water, turning everything around them into a dark cloud. Mac reacted, reaching out to grab Jim as the shark thrashed violently. The force of the attack sent Jim spinning, his body jerking as the shark pulled him deeper. The rest of the team turned, their training kicking in. Their hands scrambled for weapons, for anything to stop the attack. Jim fought, his hands pushing against the shark's snout, his mind struggling to process what was happening. The pain was unbearable, but he knew he had to fight. His teammates reached for him, trying to pull him free, but the shark was relentless. It twisted again, dragging him even farther down. Nathan fired his spear gun, the tip slicing through the water and hitting the shark's side. It flinched but did not release Jim. Blood was everywhere now, mixing with the ocean's darkness, making it nearly impossible to see. Caleb lunged forward, grabbing Jim's vest and pulling with all his strength. The shark shook violently, thrashing its body, refusing to let go. Jim's movements were slowing. His hands, once clawing at the water, were weakening. His breathing, controlled only moments ago, had turned into a desperate struggle. His teammates weren't giving up. They fired, punched, kicked, anything to get the shark to release him. The shark turned, its eyes locked onto the other SEALs. It felt the resistance, the fight, but it was not afraid. It bit down harder, pulling Jim fully into its grip. The last thing he saw was the blurry faces of his team reaching for him, their movements frantic. Then the shark dove. The water grew darker as Jim was pulled away, his body disappearing into the depths. The struggle was over. The SEALs remained, their hands still outstretched, their weapons still raised. But there was nothing left to fight. The ocean had swallowed him whole. Mac was the first to react, his instincts pushing him forward, his mind refusing to accept what had just happened. He swam down, ignoring the pain in his lungs, searching, hoping. Nathan followed, his eyes scanning the darkness, his body tense. Caleb called for backup through his comms, his voice breaking as he gave the report. They searched for minutes that felt like hours, moving in every direction, their light slicing through the murky water. But there was no sign of Jim. The blood trail led into the abyss, fading as the current carried it away. The shark was gone, taking their teammate with it. When they finally surfaced, the boat was already moving toward them and the crew scrambled to pull them out of the water. Their expressions said it all. They knew what had happened and what had been lost. The official report listed Jim Clarkson as missing and presumed dead. The search continued for days, but there was nobody to recover, no remains to bring home. The Navy classified the attack as one of the most aggressive shark incidents ever recorded during a military operation. The men who had fought for Jim that night carried the weight of that moment with them. The training exercise had been meant to prepare them for war, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality of that attack. The ocean had taken one of their own, and no training, skill, or firepower had been enough to stop it. The waters off the coast of New Zealand had always fascinated Richard Davenport. The deep trenches, untouched marine life, and ocean mysteries had drawn him in since childhood. Now, at 56 years old, the billionaire tech mogul had the resources to explore those depths in ways few others could. His latest project was a custom-built submersible designed to withstand the crushing pressures of the deep and capture high-resolution footage of creatures that lived in total darkness. He had spent months planning this dive, choosing the perfect location, ensuring that his team had prepared for every possible scenario. But on July 10, 2024, all the preparation in the world would not be enough. That morning, Richard had been in high spirits. He stood on the deck of the Horizon, his private research vessel, watching as his team ran final checks on the submersible. The sky was clear, the water calm. Everything seemed perfect. His lead engineer, Daniel Groves, double-checked the hull's integrity. The vessel's pilot, Marcus Vance, reviewed the navigation system. Richard's assistant, Evelyn Holt, recorded the pre-dive briefing, ensuring every detail of the expedition would be documented. The dive was set to take place near the Kermadec Trench, one of the deepest underwater canyons in the world. New Zealand's waters were home to some of the ocean's most powerful predators. Great white sharks thrived in these areas, drawn by the abundant seal population and rich feeding grounds. Scientists had tracked some of the largest specimens ever recorded in these waters, some exceeding 20 feet in length. While Richard and his team knew the risks, they had not expected trouble. The submersible's thick titanium hull had been designed to handle encounters with large marine animals. But that day, something would test its limits in ways they had never imagined. By noon, Richard was inside the submersible, seated comfortably as Marcus prepared to take them down. The interior was sleek, with high-tech screens displaying data in real time. Cameras lined the exterior, ready to capture footage of whatever lay below. The plan was simple: descend slowly, explore the trench, and surface after 4 hours. The crew aboard the Horizon watched closely, monitoring the descent. At 300 feet, everything was going smoothly. The water around them darkened as they moved deeper, the bright blues of the surface fading into black. Small fish darted past, their bodies reflecting the glow of the submersible's lights. Richard leaned forward, excited, watching the live feed on the screens. At 800 feet, the first signs of the trench appeared. A steep drop, the ocean floor falling away into a vast abyss. This was what he had come for, the unexplored, the unknown. Then, without warning, the first impact hit. The submersible shook violently, a loud metallic groan filling the cabin. Marcus gripped the controls, his face tightening as he tried to stabilize their descent. The cameras caught a glimpse of something massive moving past them, just out of focus. Richard's heart pounded. They had expected large marine life, but nothing aggressive. Before they could react, a second impact struck harder than the first. The submersible tilted, alarms flashing as pressure sensors detected a breach. On the surface, Daniel and Evelyn saw the readings spike. The hull had been hit, hard. Daniel grabbed the radio, calling for an immediate status update. Evelyn's hands trembled as she watched the data. Something wasn't right. Inside the submersible, water began seeping through a small crack near the viewport. Marcus tried to raise them, reversing the descent. But another forceful blow spun the vessel. Richard grabbed onto the side panel, his breath quick and uneven. The cameras outside flickered, catching brief glimpses of a massive shape circling them. Then they saw it. The great white shark, estimated at least 18 feet long, came into full view. Its body moved with terrifying precision, and its eyes locked on the submersible. It had not mistaken them for prey. It was attacking. Whether out of aggression or confusion, it was relentless. It rammed the hull again, cracking one of the exterior plates. The sound of metal giving way filled the cabin, and water poured in faster. Marcus fought to stabilize the vessel, trying to bring them up before the damage worsened. Richard's mind raced. He had faced danger before, risky business deals, security threats, even near-death experiences, but nothing like this. This was different. This was survival. On the horizon, panic spread through the crew. The readings showed rapid water intake, pressure loss, and failing systems. Daniel ordered an emergency retrieval, directing the ship closer to their last known position. The winch system was activated and designed to pull the submersible back if needed. But it was too late. The shark returned, slamming the vessel with enough force to cause it to tumble. The emergency lights flickered and the crack in the hull widened. Richard braced himself as the submersible tilted sharply. The deep ocean, once a place of wonder, was now a trap. Water flooded in, covering the floor. Marcus shouted for the emergency ascent, but the controls failed. The pressure was too much, and the submersible was sinking. The shark was still there, circling, watching. Its powerful jaws struck again, tearing at the weakened hull. The impact sent another rush of water inside. Richard locked eyes with Marcus, both realizing what was about to happen. Then, the final breach. The hull gave way and water exploded into the cabin. The last thing the crew on the horizon saw on their monitors was a burst of bubbles, a dark shadow, and nothing. The ocean swallowed the submersible whole. Rescue efforts began immediately. Divers were deployed, scanning the area for any sign of wreckage. The crew searched desperately, their voices frantic over the radio. Hours passed. Sonar picked up debris and twisted metal resting at the bottom of the trench. But there was no sign of Richard or Marcus. The world woke up to the news of Richard Davenport's disappearance. The headlines covered every angle. Tech mogul lost at sea, billionaire's last dive, shark attack or deep-sea disaster. Some speculated about equipment failure, others about the dangers of extreme ocean exploration. But those who saw the readings, footage, and evidence knew the truth. A great white shark, an apex predator, had met Richard Davenport in the ocean's depths. And in that encounter, nature had won. The ocean off the coast of Norway had always felt like home to Sarah Lawson. She had spent years studying orcas, dedicating her life to understanding their behavior, hunting patterns, and human interactions. At 29, she was one of the leading researchers in her field, confident in her ability to read these powerful predators. She had never felt fear in the water, only respect. But on August 14, 2023, everything she thought she knew about orcas was tested in a way she never expected. That morning, Sarah and her team set out from Tromsø, a city in northern Norway known for its rich marine life. The waters were deep and cold, home to some of the largest orcapods in the world. Her research team consisted of 3 others: David Renshaw, her longtime research partner, Nora Ellis, a marine photographer documenting their work, and Eric Hansen, the boat's operator and safety diver. They had been tracking a pod for several weeks, recording their communication patterns and feeding habits. This particular pod was well known in the area, a group of 10 orcas that often hunted herring near the fjords. By midday, they had followed the pod to an open area miles from shore. The orcas were active, moving in tight formations, their dorsal fins cutting through the water. Sarah had seen this behavior before. They were hunting. A bait ball of herring swirled beneath them, the fish darting in all directions as the orcas coordinated their attack. She watched from the side of the boat, fascinated, as the whales used their tails to stun the fish before swallowing them whole. She had been waiting for the right moment to get into the water. Snorkeling alongside orcas was part of her research. It allowed her to observe their movements up close and see how they communicated in ways cameras couldn't always capture. The team had done this dozens of times before, always with caution, always keeping a safe distance. Sarah checked her gear while David held onto the rope that secured her to the boat. Eric kept an eye on the sonar, ensuring no other large predators were nearby. Orcas were the top predators, but other creatures, especially large sharks, sometimes roamed these waters. Everything looked clear. She gave the signal and slipped into the water, the cold biting against her skin even through her wetsuit. The underwater world was different and quieter. She could hear the distant clicks and whistles of the orcas as they communicated. She kept her breathing steady and moved slowly to avoid startling them. Below her, the orcas glided effortlessly, their sleek black and white bodies cutting through the blue. One of them, a large male, swam close enough that she could see the scars along his skin, marks from past hunts and battles. For the first few minutes, everything was normal. She floated near the surface, observing and taking mental notes. The pod continued its hunt, undisturbed by her presence. Then, something changed. One of the orcas, a massive adult she didn't recognize, broke away from the group. It turned toward her, its body moving differently, more direct, more focused. She had seen curiosity before, but this was something else. It circled her, slow at first, then faster. Her heart pounded. She kept her movements controlled, not wanting to trigger an aggressive response. The orca swam closer, its massive frame blocking her view of the others. It was too close. Sarah felt the shift in the water just before it happened. Without warning, the orca lunged. Its body slammed into hers with incredible force, knocking the breath from her chest. The impact sent her spinning, her mask shifting as water rushed in. She tried to regain control, kicking toward the surface, but the orca came again before she could, pushing her downward. Her mind raced. She had never seen an orca act this way toward a human. She had always believed they were intelligent enough to distinguish between prey and people. But this one wasn't following any behavior she recognized. It wasn't playing. It wasn't curious. It was testing her. She struggled to orient herself, forcing her arms to move even as her body screamed for air. Above her, the surface felt impossibly far, and the weight of the ocean pressed down. Then, just as suddenly as it had attacked, the orca pulled away. Sarah felt the shift in the water as it turned, its body moving back toward the pod. It didn't look at her again. It was gone. She kicked upward, her lungs burning. The moment her head broke the surface, she gasped for air, coughing as she fought to stay afloat. The boat was close, but her limbs felt heavy, her body still reeling from the impact. She heard David shouting her name and saw Eric moving fast, throwing a rope toward her. Her hands barely had the strength to grab it, but she did. Eric and David pulled her onto the boat, her body shaking. She collapsed onto the deck, trying to catch her breath. Nora knelt beside her, her face pale. The whole team had seen it. They had watched as the orca slammed into her and witnessed how it had singled her out. Eric grabbed a towel, wrapping it around her as she shivered. The boat rocked gently, but everything felt unsteady. Sarah sat up slowly, wincing as she felt the bruises forming across her ribs. She had been lucky. She wouldn't be sitting on that deck if the orca had struck her harder or dragged her deeper. The team remained silent, processing what had happened. They had spent years studying orcas, believing they understood them, but this moment had changed something. Sarah had always trusted the ocean and the creatures within it. But now, as she gazed back at the water, a heavy unease settled over her. Something had changed. The orca had decided that day, and she couldn't begin to understand why. The waters off the coast of Gansby, South Africa, had long been a hotspot for thrill-seekers wanting to come face-to-face with one of the ocean's most feared predators, the great white shark. Known as Shark Alley, this stretch of ocean was home to some of the largest great whites in the world. Tourists and professional divers from around the globe came here for cage diving experiences, believing the thick metal bars would keep them safe. But on February 12, 2025, everything changed. Darren Lucas had spent years diving in dangerous waters. At 35, he was no stranger to the unpredictable nature of the ocean. He had worked as a marine guide, a safety diver, and even an underwater photographer, capturing rare images of sea creatures few people ever saw. This trip to South Africa was supposed to be another adventure, a chance to observe great whites up close. He had signed up with Deep Blue Expeditions, a reputable dive company running cage dives for years without incident. That morning, Darren and a small group of divers and tourists arrived at the dock early. The crew prepared the boat, the Ocean Hunter, while Captain Neil Faber reviewed the safety protocols. The dive team included Rick Dalton, the lead dive master, and Josh Miller, the boat's deckhand. Among the other divers were Hannah Briggs, a marine biologist documenting shark behavior, and Victor Hughes, a filmmaker shooting footage for an upcoming documentary. The ocean was calm as they left the shore, and the boat cut through the water as they headed toward the dive site. The crew dropped anchor in a spot known for frequent shark sightings. Chum, buckets of fish parts and blood were dumped into the water, creating a scent trail to attract the sharks. The first divers suited up, climbing into the thick metal cage secured to the side of the boat. Darren waited patiently for his turn. He had seen sharks before, but this was different. There was an excitement, an anticipation. Even though the crew followed strict safety measures, everyone knew nothing was guaranteed when you were in the water with a predator like this. After about an hour, Darren put on his wetsuit, adjusted his mask, and grabbed the cage's metal bars as he climbed in. The water was cold, wrapping around him as he descended. Bubbles rose from his regulator as he steadied himself, gripping the bars. Visibility was good. Schools of fish darted past, their bodies flashing silver in the sunlight. Then it appeared. An 18-foot great white shark glided into view, moving slowly and deliberately. Its eyes were black, its body scarred from past battles. The shark circled the cage, sending a shiver of unease through Darren. He had seen many sharks before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just passing by, it was watching. The other divers clung to the bars, their breaths controlled, their eyes locked on the predator. Cameras flashed, capturing every movement. The shark moved closer, its massive body brushing against the cage. For a moment it seemed almost calm, simply observing. Then everything changed. Without warning, the great white rammed the cage. The impact sent a shockwave through the metal structure, shaking it violently. Darren's grip tightened as bubbles rushed past his face. The divers above gasped as they saw the cage rock. Neil shouted for everyone to remain calm, but the tension had spiked. The shark backed up slightly, its powerful tail stirring the water, then surged forward again. This time the impact was stronger. The metal groaned under the force, one of the bars bending slightly. Darren's pulse quickened. He had trusted these cages, but now he wasn't sure. Josh leaned over the boat's railing, gripping the winch line that secured the cage. Neil's urgent command to pull it up echoed in his mind as he began hauling the cage upward. But it was too late. The shark lunged again, its snout hitting the weakened cage section with a force that twisted the metal. The opening was small, but it was enough. The shark thrashed, its jaws snapping forward, catching Darren's arm. Pain exploded through his body as teeth tore through his wetsuit. He struggled, kicking, trying to free himself. But the shark pulled harder. The metal groaned as the cage bent further, and in one horrifying moment, Darren was ripped from the cage. The water turned red. Panic erupted on the boat. Hannah screamed, grabbing for the rope. Victor's camera fell from his hands as he scrambled backward. Rick dove for the emergency pole, trying to jab at the shark from above, but the predator was too deep now, dragging Darren further down. Underwater, Darren fought. The shark's grip tightened, its head shaking violently as it pulled him deeper. His vision blurred. He tried to push against its snout, to strike at its eyes, but the loss of blood made his movements weak. The ocean swallowed him, the boat above growing smaller. Josh and Rick grabbed a spear and stabbed into the water, hoping to drive the shark away. However, their efforts were futile. The great white thrashed one final time and disappeared into the deep. Darren was gone. The crew immediately called for rescue teams, sending out a distress signal. The boat remained anchored as divers prepared to search the waters. Hours passed, but there was no sign of Darren. The only thing left was the twisted cage, the torn rope, and the lingering scent of blood in the water. News of the attack spread quickly. Once confident in the safety of cage dives, the diving community questioned everything. Authorities launched an investigation, and Deep Blue Expeditions suspended operations. Safety protocols were reviewed, but the damage was already done for those on the Ocean Hunter that day. Darren Lucas had entered the water as an experienced diver, someone who had spent years among the creatures of the deep. But that day, the ocean reminded everyone of a simple truth. When you are in a predator's territory, the rules are not yours to make. The morning of March 24th, 2024, started like any other for Petty Officer Jake Henderson and his team. The U.S. Coast Guard had been monitoring the waters off the California coast, just outside San Diego, where rough waves and strong currents often led to distress calls. Fishing boats, recreational vessels, and even cargo ships sometimes found themselves in trouble, and it was the Coast Guard's job to get them out safely. Jake had been in the service for nearly 8 years. At 28, he had been on more rescues than he could count. Some were routine, a boat out of gas, a lost kayaker, a simple tow back to shore. Others were more serious, capsized vessels, medical emergencies, storms turning an ordinary day at sea into a fight for survival. He had seen a lot, but nothing like what was about to happen that afternoon. By midday, the United States Coast Guard cutter, Pacific Guardian crew, had just finished a training exercise when a call came through. A small fishing boat, the Maribel, had radioed for help. The engine had failed and the ship drifted dangerously close to a rocky outcrop. The waves were picking up, making it impossible for the fishermen to steer away. They needed assistance before their boat was smashed against the rocks. Jake and his team responded immediately, including Chief Petty Officer Robert Lang, Petty Officer Daniel Cruz, and boatswain's mate Tyler Evans. They reached the location within minutes. The boat bobbed in the choppy water and 2 fishermen clung to the side, their faces tight with worry. It was a straightforward rescue. Jake would be lowered into the water, secure a tow line, and help guide the boat out of danger. As the crew lowered Jake into the water, he focused on the job. The cold rush hit him as he adjusted his breathing and swam toward the fishing boat. The waves made it difficult to stay steady, but he had done this before. He reached the vessel's side and grabbed hold, signaling to the men inside that he would attach the line. Then, something changed. The ocean, which had been restless but predictable, suddenly felt different. The movement of the water shifted. A presence lingered nearby, something large enough to create an unnatural stillness. Jake didn't see it at first, but he felt it. Years of experience told him to stay alert. Then, out of his eye, he saw the shadow. It moved slowly at first, gliding just beneath the surface. A massive, great white shark, at least 16 feet long, circled just beyond the boat. Jake kept breathing steady, reminding himself that sharks weren't mindless killers. Most of the time, they were curious, not aggressive. The fishermen saw it too. One of them clutched the side of the boat, his eyes wide with panic. Jake signaled for everyone to stay calm. He needed to move fast. If the shark lost interest, he could finish the job, get the tow line in place, and get out. But the shark wasn't leaving. It made another pass, closer this time. Jake felt the water shift as the predator swam beneath him. He kept his body still, hands firm on the rope, trying not to make sudden movements. He had seen sharks while training, but never this close during a rescue. Then, in a flash, the shark changed its behavior. It turned sharply, its body cutting through the water with sudden speed. It was no longer circling. It was coming straight for him. Jake barely had time to react. The shark lunged, its jaws snapping just inches from his leg. He kicked back, pushing himself away from the fishing boat. The shark bit down, on his rescue gear. Its teeth clamped onto the flotation device attached to his suit, tearing it apart. The force sent Jake spinning, water rushing over him as he struggled to regain control. From the Pacific Guardian, the crew saw everything. Tyler shouted for Jake to move while Robert and Daniel grabbed emergency equipment. The fishermen on the Maribel watched in horror, frozen in place. Jake fought to stay above the surface. The shark wasn't done. It circled again, its movements faster, more erratic. The attack had been quick, but it had tasted something. Whether it had mistaken him for prey or was simply testing, Jake didn't want to wait to find out. He pushed off the fishing boat and swam hard toward the Coast Guard vessel. His team had already thrown a rope into the water, yelling for him to grab it. He reached for it just as the shark surged forward again. The moment his fingers wrapped around the rope, the crew pulled. Jake's body jerked upward, his arms burning as he clung to the lifeline. Below, the shark twisted, its tail cutting through the water as it made another pass beneath him. It was still too close. With one last heave, the crew hauled Jake onto the deck. He collapsed, coughing up seawater, his pulse racing. Robert grabbed his shoulders, checking for injuries, while Daniel scanned the water for the shark. It was still there. The great white circled for another minute, its massive dorsal fin slicing through the waves. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it disappeared into the depths. Jake sat up, his breath uneven. The flotation device on his suit was shredded, the bite marks unmistakable. His body was unharmed, but his mind replayed the moment again and again. 1 second later, the outcome would have been different if there had been one wrong movement. The crew wasted no time. They secured the tow line and pulled the Maribel away from the rocks toward safety. The fishermen, still shaken, thanked them repeatedly, their voices unsteady. Back on the Pacific Guardian, the crew exchanged glances. They had trained for all kinds of situations, storms, fires, capsized boats, but this was different. Jake leaned against the railing, staring at the water. He had always respected the ocean and understood its dangers, but now he had felt it in a way he never had before. The great white shark had come close, too close. And next time, someone might not be as lucky. The Bahamas has always been a dream vacation spot for families. Its clear, warm waters, gentle waves, and colorful reefs make it perfect for swimming and snorkeling. Tourists come from around the world, eager to explore its underwater beauty. But beneath the surface, the ocean has its own rules. On July 22, 2022, those rules changed everything for one family. Ethan Parker was 10 years old, energetic, and excited about his first snorkeling trip. He had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. His father, Daniel Parker, had promised him they would explore the reef together, just off the coast of Nassau. His mother, Rebecca Parker, stayed on the boat with his younger sister, Ava, watching as they slipped into the water. The day had started early. The family woke up in their hotel room, packing their bags with snacks, sunscreen, and snorkel gear. Ethan barely touched his breakfast, too eager to get to the water. Daniel had reassured him that the reefs were safe, that the shallow waters were calm, and that he would be beside him the entire time. Their guide, Lucas Bennett, greeted them at the dock. He was an experienced diver who had spent years taking tourists out to explore the reefs. He handed out life vests and went over safety instructions. Everyone listened carefully, though Ethan could barely contain his excitement. The boat ride was short, and soon they reached the reef, a beautiful stretch of coral just below the surface. Small fish darted between the rocks, their bright colors flashing in the sunlight. The water was warm and welcoming. Daniel helped Ethan adjust his mask and snorkel, making sure everything was secure before they jumped in. At first, everything was perfect. Ethan kicked his legs, floating above the reef, watching as fish swam beneath him. He felt like he was inside an aquarium. His father stayed close, pointing out different sea creatures. He saw a sea turtle gliding through the water, a school of yellowtail snapper moving in unison, and even a stingray resting on the ocean floor. But then, without realizing it, Ethan drifted. It was only a few feet at first, just enough for the boat to seem a little farther away. He didn't notice right away. He had been following a fish, watching it weave through the coral. When he finally looked up, his father was farther than he expected. He turned, kicking his legs harder to swim back. That's when he saw it. A shadow moved in the water. It was slow at first, gliding beneath him. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He had learned about sharks in school and seen them in books and on TV. But this was different. This was real. The tiger shark was massive, at least 14 feet long. Its body moved smoothly and its striped skin blended into the water. It circled once as if deciding what to do next. Ethan didn't move. He had been told before that sharks usually weren't interested in people, but this one wasn't swimming away, it was getting closer. Panic set in. He kicked harder, trying to reach the boat. He could hear his father shouting, though the water muffled the words. The shark turned again, cutting through the water with more speed. Then it struck. The force hit Ethan hard, knocking him off balance. Pain shot through his leg as the shark's teeth sank into him. He screamed, bubbles rushing from his mouth. He thrashed, pushing against the shark's head to free himself. The shark's grip tightened, pulling him downward. Daniel saw everything on the boat. The moment the shark attacked, he was already moving. He dove into the water without hesitating, swimming as fast as he could toward his son. Lucas grabbed a spear from the boat, shouting for help. Ethan struggled, his small hands hitting the shark's snout, his body twisting. Blood filled the water, clouding his vision. The pain was overwhelming. He could feel the shark pulling, its jaws locked around his leg. Then, suddenly, his father was there. Daniel reached for Ethan, grabbing him with one arm while using his free hand to punch at the shark. He struck it once, then again, aiming for its gills. The shark held on, shaking its head. Lucas reached the water's edge, spear in hand. He jabbed at the shark, the sharp tip scraping against its skin. The predator flinched, its grip loosening for just a second. It was enough. Daniel pulled Ethan free, kicking hard toward the boat. The shark hovered briefly before turning away and disappearing into the deep. Hands reached down, hauling them onto the deck. Rebecca cried out as she saw her son, his leg torn and bleeding. Ava clung to her mother, too scared to look. Lucas grabbed a towel, pressing it against Ethan's leg to stop the bleeding. Daniel held his son close, his hands shaking. The boat's captain radioed for emergency help, turning the vessel back toward shore. Ethan's face was pale, his breaths quick and shallow. He clutched his father's arm, his small body trembling. The ride back was a blur. The dock was crowded when they arrived, paramedics rushing forward. Ethan was lifted onto a stretcher, his mother never letting go of his hand. The hospital was ready for them, the doctors moving fast. Hours later, the news came. Ethan would survive. The shark's bite had torn into muscle, but the doctors were able to save his leg. He would need surgery, stitches, and months of recovery, but he would walk again. That night, as Ethan lay in the hospital bed, his father sat beside him, holding his hand. The scars would fade, but the memory would never leave them. The ocean, once a place of wonder, had shown its other side. And for the Parker family, nothing would ever be the same again.